Musashi's Dokoro, The Way of Walking Alone, half crazy, half genius, finding modern meaning in the Sword Saint's last words. This multiple award-winning book opens the mind of the world's greatest swordsman's views on life and war, with a modern analysis. Read the reviews and decide for yourself at Amazon.
Welcome to the Martial Arts and Life podcast with United States Martial Art Hall of Fame member, nationally board-certified life coach, and multi-award-winning author Chris Wilder.
Hey, good day, good morning, good afternoon, good tea time. You know, all of that stuff. Hope your day is well, whatever is going on in your world, and that you can find a small slice of, well, good stuff. Maybe you wore some good clothes today that you hadn't worn in a while and you looked smart. Maybe you just had clean water to drink. I don't know, but whatever it is, I hope that you found some value in your world today and a little bit of appreciation. So today is about karate being the worst actor. Now, I'm not talking about Steven Seagal worst acting. And by the way, for those of you out there that have not seen Above the Law, see that and then just stop. There's really no need. Well, hard to kill. Okay, fine. You get the point. Steven Seagal is not known for his acting chops. But Above the Law, that's a pretty sweet movie. But the thing is that karate is not a very good actor, not for today's world. And this is going to sound a little odd at first, but I think that when it gets to the conclusion, you'll realize that, I'm pretty doggone right. You'll put your index finger on your chin and go, yeah, that Chris, he's something. He sure nailed that. At least that's what I hope you're going to do. When we look at karate, it's what we see, but it's also what we want to show. That means that what we want to show, like sometimes, very frankly, it just might be our ego. Man, that was a good throw. Oh, that was insightful. That was executed well. And look, man, I'm not saying that it doesn't feel good to have somebody go, hey, that was pretty cool. I had a little ego feed the other night. I was just looking at some guys working on some technique out of a kata, and they said, well, what does it look like, And I said, you go like this. And I did it, and they went, oh, wow, okay. I didn't think much of it. And of course, there was a nice ego feed that they were like, oh, wow, that was pretty cool. He just popped that off. And then the other thing is that, it was like, yeah, that felt pretty good. That felt pretty good. Not the technique, actually the ego feed of somebody going, hey, that was nice. So I'm not going to deny that. We all got that. It just is what it is. And it's enjoyable. But of course, like anything, you don't want to rotate on it. You don't want to get too deep on it. You don't want to take a luxurious bath in that ego feed. It's like I say frequently, it's the Goldilocks rule. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's just right. Now, the other thing is that, we may want to go big with our technique because, well, honestly, it's kind of fun to get big. When you talk to people who are involved in negotiations or the business world, you'll see them talk about things like, a power stance or, which is the feet shoulder width or wider apart. Maybe the hands on the hips. We could call it the Superman pose, because it's often called that. It would be a little ridiculous to see it in the boardroom, but you can do a subdued version of it. And then there's other things like sitting back in the chair, kind of reclining, and maybe throwing an arm sort of off to the side a little bit, taking up space. Taking up space is one of the means of controlling a room, a moment, whatever it might be. You can watch police do this. You can go to YouTube and you can watch police do this. If they're not trying to really, let me put it this way, is that oftentimes when there's an approach by a police officer, if it's not a clear and evident threat, you won't see any kind of establishment of dominant space because the uniform is doing that for them. The badge, the uniform, whatever it might be, is doing that for them. And then if they need to get bigger, they will. And that's, something that gets called into. So you're talking about, that power stance, that seizing the moment, taking control of the room, dominating, being big. And, it's kind of fun to be big. Babies, this is just a complete aside, but, you watch babies stretch when they get unwrapped from swaddling. And that's the first thing they do is they get big. Arms go over the head. There's a big stretch. The legs kick out. And, it's like, yeah, this is my space. There's other things that are involved in the reasoning and the service of what that is, that stretch. But, you get the idea. It's being big is something that happens. You watch animals. Their fur will spike up. They'll get bigger that way. Peacocks. There's your great example right there. Let's throw up some big feathers and a huge fan out there with a bunch of eyeballs on it. That ought to work for you. So you get the idea that it's kind of like a nature thing. It's what we want to do. We want to get big. Now, if you're an extrovert, absolutely, you're going to just chew up a room. If you're an introvert, not as much, because it's not your nature. But still, it's fun to get big. And it works really well in theater. And I shouldn't say theater. What I should say is movies. But movies are a unique thing. They get big and they get small. And you take a look at like a Michael Bay film, which is just spinning silver things and cars turning into robots and, jumping. It's crazy. Kinetically, it's too much for me. It's too much color. It's too much movement. It's just too much. I watched one Transformer movie and went, I can't do this. It's not enjoyable. But that's just for me. Now, other people might find that whole kinetic show to be extraordinary and, some of the best. Not the way I see it, but to each their own, right? So the movies want to show you. The worst movies are the ones that don't show, but tell. It's really simple. The worst movies have a tendency to tell what's going on and not show you. The nature of karate is to hopefully not talk too much and show you. The narrative, the explanation is supposed to support the movement, not dominate it. Now follow that with me if you will. You can go on YouTube and you can look at a million videos. And it's like, okay, when's this guy going to stop talking? Show me how you punch the bag. Get to it, right? And we are conditioned and brought up, and we are now grown into that type of viewpoint of how we think instruction should be. It's kind of like, don't tell me, show me. An old adage, isn't it? And it rings true because it always has been true. It's just that some of the media in the past didn't have that video to go with it. If you think back to the 30s and the 20s, not like I was alive then, but you listen to the old radio shows, they had to tell you about it. They couldn't show it to you. The medium didn't allow it. And it's the same thing with audio. If you listen to a podcast, the people who paint pictures usually have a more engaging podcast than those that just try to discuss displaced phenomena. So what you're looking at is you're looking at demonstration and a possible instruction to the masses that lays on top of that. You know that picture we've all seen of, I think it's out in front of the Shuri Castle in Naha, and it's, I don't know, probably 100 guys in karate gis, and they're all lined up perfectly. I think they're in Shikodachi doing like a down block, like a big sumo stance. And there's a guy up on a stage, and he's doing the position so everybody can see it. And that's education of the masses. And it has to be a gross movement. Now, there's an argument that has changed the structure of karate, and I have to subscribe to that as well. I think it has, because it's like, well, this is what I taught, this is how I do it, this is the way that it works. And it isn't necessarily so, because it is this big, massive movement. And here's where we get into karate being a bad actor. It's the difference between that movie we were talking about and theater. Theater is a vastly different technique than one that takes place on your small screen in a movie or a television show. They're different. And one of the ways that you can see this is that I've talked about it, and I'll put it in the show links. You'll be able to go to it and see it if you'd like, but you can just look it up very easily. It's just Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in the movie Heat. One plays a cop who has a life that just is on the skids, who's hunting a contract killer who's back out plying his trade. And one of them has contempt for the other in regard to the way that they've chosen to live their lives, but there's also an underlying respect that even though what you've chosen is not what I would choose, I do have a level of respect for the commitment that you have for your given trade, whether it's a cop or a hitman. I know, it sounds kind of weird, but that's the level that it is. And Michael Mann, the director, shot this movie, and I remember him talking about how when they shot the scene, and by the way, you've got to look it up. It is one of the greatest scenes in cinematic history. Two incredible actors doing exactly what I described, just being immersed. It's at a coffee table in a coffee shop, and it is intense. When you understand the underlying theater, the underlying gravity, the underlying story that's being told here. But back to the director, Michael Mann talked about actually getting two cameras to shoot this at the same time so that he could get the actors reacting off of one another and not just reacting to the contrivance in their mind for a blank camera lens. And that he had to push the camera just right to the edge of the frame. It's just within like a 32nd of an inch of being in the frame. It's an amazing scene. But what you'll see there is you'll see subtlety, pauses, open space, eye movement, a flick of the corner of somebody's mouth. That's the subtlety of a movie scene. If you were to do that same scene to reconstruct it in a theater, you've got yourself a problem because it doesn't translate very well. Because there's going to have to be some arm movement and maybe the body shifting, kind of akimbo in the chair, and large projection. And it's like Bruce Dickinson from the rock band Iron Maiden talked about. He said, I'm always playing to the last person. I'm always singing to the last row in the theater. And that's exactly what theater actors do. They've got to be big. If you took that technique and brought it into the movies, it would be seen as ridiculous. And I would submit to you that a lot of our karate, hey, guilty of it too. Not saying that I'm perfect here, but a lot of our karate is about theater when it should be about movies. It should be about that intensity of that moment, that movement that's only the amount that's needed to get the job done, and to move in a way that, well, as one teacher once told me, you shouldn't have anybody in the room understand your karate, let alone the person that you've done it to. And that's really what we're getting to here, is that because of the training in the past, when karate moved into the larger university settings or the larger, arenas, from the backyards and the common rooms in homes, it had to be bigger. It had to be theater to convey the information to the very last person. Because the goal is to educate, and we got to get the mostest for the leastest with the bestest. That's the way you do it. You've always done it that way. Time immemorial, it's done that way. Think of it this way. It's the difference between a marching band and a jazz band. That marching band is playing in an arena, an auditorium, a stadium, maybe of 60,000 people. Whereas the jazz band might be playing in a smoky nightclub that has only 52 patrons for that night. So there is a significant difference in not only the music that comes out between those two bands, it's still music. There's a difference between the acting that comes out between theater and movie. There is a difference. And I'm here to tell you that we should not engage in gross movements unless, of course, it specifically calls for it. You don't need to be big. Let's go a little bit German here. You don't have to use the gross, the large movement. You should be, I think the word is klein. You should be smaller. You should be smaller in your process and get really good results, get big results. Let me take you back to that scene, that movie Heat with Pacino and De Niro. You're getting massive results with minimum effort. Oh no, I'm not telling you that they're not good at what they did and they didn't lay it out and figure out what they needed to do and their motivations and the way that they structure it and what they're going to do and how they're going to look. When it comes to the exertion of calories, not so much. Not so much, just enough to convey a very powerful moment. So you could call it less is more if you'd like. That's fine. You know, you could even go back to 1977, I'm beginning to date myself again, but you could go back to 1977 with Steve Martin and his classic comedy album called Let's Get Small. Yeah, I think that Steve Martin may be the leader of our new martial arts movement, Let's Get Small. This is not something that I think is a panacea. I don't think it's a salve. I don't think it's an ointment. I don't think it's something that should be universally applied. But I think that we should step back for a minute and put our fingers on our chin and kind of ponder it and say, does that really need to be that big? Does it need to be that big because, well, it's feeding my ego? Does it need to be that big because, well, it's just a lot of fun to do it that way? Or is it that I'm too busy watching movies and I'm seeing their action and I'm saying, oh, okay, it's very different. It's a very different thing. You look at martial arts films today and you'll see, large movements and jump cuts to close-ups and different angles. But when you go back to the old Run Shaw movies from China, the, martial arts, the Five Masters of Death, which was pretty doggone good. I did enjoy it. You'll see that they come out of the Chinese theater and their movements are big. The cameras are held back. You see both people almost in totality for the entire fight scene. There's very little jump cut, not too much close-up. It was a function of not only where they came from in regard to their skills, but also, camera usage and, the maturing of the industry and technique and so forth. So I'm not trying to condemn that. I'm just saying observe it for what it is. So, yeah, I'm here to tell you that you need to get small. You don't need to be big. You don't need to burn that many calories. And the thing of it is that are you really more interested in the process or the goal? Well, I would argue that both. You don't want to be exclusive. If you're just focused on the process, you're going to miss the goal. And if you're just, if you're just on the goal, you're going to miss the process. Oh, is that Goldilocks rule once again? Yeah, it sure sounds like it, doesn't it? Here's my recommendation. Take the first form that you learned, no matter how basic or rudimentary you believe it to be. It could be Gigsai, it could be Gikisai, it could be Taikyoko, it could be a lot of different things. It doesn't make any difference. Go make it smaller. What you're going to begin to experience is a different way of being with it. Now, you may not stay with that. You may just explore it. That's cool. That's what we do. But there is a lesson to be learned in there. And that is that karate, sometimes karate is the world's worst actor. Hey, just a quick thank you to everybody that has really done me a solid. I asked you a while back to go over to iTunes and to rate the podcast and to share it with others that you think might find the podcast valuable. To those of you who went over to iTunes and did that, big thank you. Open hands. Thank you so much for doing that. It makes all the difference in the world. And for those of you who are sharing the podcast with others that you believe may find it of interest, thank you for that as well. And for those of you who doubled down and have done an iTunes review and are sharing the podcast with others, a big double heartfelt thank you. That's the only way that this podcast grows. If it is of value, if you found value with it, whether it's this episode or a previous episode, I ask you not to hesitate to share it with somebody. I know it's going to take you a click or two. It's going to take an email. It might take a text. And it's going to take a moment out of your day to do it. But I'm asking you to take that moment. So if you haven't written a review, please do so. If you haven't shared the podcast with somebody, please do so. And to those of you who've done either or both, again, an enormous, heartfelt piece of gratitude from this side of the microphone to you. And now let's go back out there and take all the goodness that we've got and put it out there on the dojo floor to not only build ourselves, but to help those around us and ultimately make for a better community. Again, big appreciation. Thanks so much. And until next time, be well. Hey, thanks for hanging around. I did a podcast recently with Todd Halsey. He is the master of ceremonies and, keeper of all good things for the Dirt Wasp podcast. You can find it at thedirtwasppodcast.com. Just a little bit about Todd. He called me up and he said, hey, I want to have you on my podcast. And okay, great. I'd like to do that. Because I was aware of Todd and we follow each other on social media. He's a retired special agent of the FBI. That's the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He's also decided to become an attorney because that would be a great thing to do. And so he's licensed to practice law in Texas. And he spent those 21 years that I spoke of earlier as a federal agent, and he worked against organized crime, violent crime, and did intelligence and counterterrorism. So the guy's pretty deep and pretty wide. He also did a little stuff with the CIA, got assigned here, did some stuff on the war on terror. It goes on. But with all of that hardcore stuff, he's a really great guy and really easy to talk to and be around. So look, he calls me up and says, I want you to have, I'm on your podcast. You bet I'm going to do that. And so I did. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to let you know about his podcast and say, hey, you know what? You might find this interesting because he asked some good questions. And the question that he did ask me about was my time with the Lakota medicine woman. And we had a chance to talk about that on his podcast. If you'd like to, saunter on over to the dirtwasppodcast.com. You can just Google that, of course, and you can find it because what the heck? Dirt Wasp? What's that? Well, you'll find out. Anyway, We'll talk soon.